Thank you, Mr. Toastmaster. Today, I'd like to talk about the curious career of JGS Boggs. JGS Boggs was an artist who unfortunately passed away this January. But I think his life and his art have a significance that goes well beyond the grave. I want to talk a little bit about his art. I want to talk a little bit about his life. I want to talk about some of the legal problems he had. And finally, I want to talk about why I think he's significant and relevant to us today. Now, Boggs' chosen art form was money. And let me read you something that he said about that. He said, "I think money is beautiful stuff. No one stops to look at the bills in their pocket, just stops and admires the detailing, the conception, the technique. Take a look at this bill here. It's an absolute splendid Itaglo print. It's actually the result of 3 separate printing processes, 2 on the face side, another on the back, all done on excellent high-quality paper." So let me ask you this. How many of you think of the money in your purse or the money in your pocket as art? Do you ever take it out or do you ever just admire it? Well, there we go. The wealthiest members of our club also happen to be the ones that appreciate the art the most. So Boggs began by doing very detailed portraits of bills. So he would use a pen and paper and he would spend days duplicating a bill. And so this is an example of his early art. It's an almost exact replica of a $100,000 bill. Later on, though, as time came, he used other currencies as models. And this is an example of a Swiss franc that he created. Now you'll notice he's drawn his own image in place of a famous Swiss politician. So that's actually JGS Boggs himself. So he's taken the currency, and rather than doing something that's an exact replica, he's come up with somewhat whimsical things. As his career developed, it became more and more whimsical. So he would put things in it like, "In fun we trust." He would come up with very different colors, very different schemes. And so as his art developed, it became more and more original. And also he started mass producing it. So initially he would spend days and hours drawing out currency. And then later on, he would start to use lithograph. He would use different printing techniques and produce bills on really a mass scale. Now, as a man, he was slight of build. He had a handsome face, with sharp features, and he had an attitude towards life that his contemporaries described as being just this side of fun and sometimes demonic. He also had a very difficult life. And what we see here is the juxtaposition of the year, his age, some of his legal problems, and his art. So as you can see over time, his art really adapted to the circumstances, and primarily the circumstances of his legal problems. So he was actually born illegitimately. He never met his father. And when he was just a baby, his mother joined the circus. And so he grew up for the first 6 years of his life traveling around as part of a carnival, which must have been very difficult. When he was 6, his mother married Jim Boggs, and together they ran a package store and bar down in Florida. When Boggs was 18, he was expelled from high school in his junior year. And although there's some question about it because he was such an inventive man, that was basically the end of his formal education, was as a junior in high school. He wandered around for a while, and finally in Chicago, he was buying a cup of coffee and doodling on a napkin, and the waitress offered to take it in exchange for a coffee, and that was really the birth of his career. Now from there, he started working on currency in his 30s. Before that, he was very, very poor. In fact, at one point he said he was just about to declare bankruptcy, and he decided that he was going to adopt currency as his career. Now, this didn't escape the attention of the Treasury police from around the world. And so initially he was arrested by the Bank of England, which has that power to put people in jail. And he was put on trial for, thank you, currency fraud. And from there, he was later arrested in Australia. He was later arrested by the US Secret Service. And finally, towards the end of his life, he had an unfortunate circumstance. He developed a taste for methadone and for meth. Now, this is unfortunate because he actually did more than just create art. He was able to create a value chain and a business model. And by that, he came up with a way that he could create art and then sell it. I don't want to go into depth about that, but basically, every step of the way, he would trade his bills for an equivalent amount of currency. Then he would sell the location of that to a collector. A collector would come and negotiate with the owner of the bill and usually pay them something like $500 for a $50 face note. Once they'd secured that, they were able to put it on the collection market and sell it for $5,000. So he had this business model that basically allowed him to print money. And Toastmasters, forgive me, I'm going to go a couple minutes over. So what he was able to do, in essence, because he was able to create a value chain, was he was able to print his own money. So when he was sued by the US Treasury Department, he engaged some lawyers and ended up having a legal bill of almost $800,000 that he was able to pay by creating his own currency. So his trial went all the way to the Supreme Court, and so the US government would print money and pay their lawyers to sue him, and Boggs was in a position where he could create his own money and pay his lawyers to be able to do it. And it eventually reached the point where it got to a judge, and the judge said, well, I accept Mr. Boggs' argument that he is printing art and not money. He said that the government has to have some means of protecting that. And as a result, the Treasury Department had confiscated over 150 notes of his worth $1.5 million that he was never able to recover. So his legacy lives on today. You can find his works in all these museums, in the British Museum and in the Museum of Modern Art. But I think his real significance is what he said about money. He said, we don't think enough about how we earn our money or what we do with it. Now, in the age of Bitcoin and other people creating their own currency, that's a lesson well worth remembering. Mr. Toastmaster.